And then the synovial valves, of course, prevent backflow. Passes through lymph nodes, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then, as I said, empties into the major veins leading into the heart eventually. Okay. So here's a pattern of the major ducts of the lymphatic system. So the lower body is predominantly drained by the thoracic duct. Right bronchiomediastinal trunk takes care of the right side of the thorax, and the left, obviously the left side. Right subclavian and left subclavian trunks take care of the upper extremities, and right jugular and left jugular trunks drain lymph out of the head. And then they all join the veins, drain into the veins at the subclavian veins there, and the jugular veins. So just know those main thoracic ducts. We probably will not see a lot of the lymphatic vessels and nodes other than these major ones in our labs. Even if we do get to see those, but just know these major ones here for sure. Okay, so then let's talk about lymph nodes. So lymphoid tissue, basically this is a connective tissue matrix that has a bunch of lymphocytes and macrophages all throughout it. And these are both immune cells. They target the pathogens and destroy and engulf them. And so it's one of the ways the body takes care of the debris here. Remember what else I was going to say about it? Right, so it traps the cellular debris and just neutralizes it there. Now, sometimes it will trap like metastasized cancer cells, and then you can sometimes get a tumor growth within the lymph node. Also, the lymphocytes can start going crazy, lose replication control, and become cancerous, and that's when you get lymphoma. Other times that these can become swollen is when you've got a viral infection or even a localized infection. And when you get a cold, you feel like all those little lumps and bumps on your neck. All of those lymph nodes are being swollen because they're taking care of extra amounts of debris and getting some inflammation there during the course of the infection. So sometimes if you've got a localized infection, we can use lymph node swelling to track the progression of that infection as well. So lymph nodes. Here are some of the major lymph nodes of the body. So we've got the cervical nodes right along the internal jugular, cranial along the base of the head, the tracheal nodes along the trachea, obviously axillary nodes in the armpit area, deep nodes near the aorta and celiac trunk, and inguinal nodes and femoral nodes. Now, these are in particular areas. What's important about those areas? Why would you need extra cleaning system there?
Higher numbers of pathogens.
Yep, so these are areas where you get a higher number of pathogen insult. So next to the celiac trunk and the mesenteric arteries, that's all your blood flow to and from your intestinal tract. Your intestinal tract is one of the major avenues the pathogens can get into your body. Same thing with the trachea. So they are and also in the armpit area, the axillary nodes. So all these are areas where you can get major insult with pathogen invasion, and so important to have extra cleaning systems there. All right. So here's an example of a CT that just is showing some enlargement of lymph nodes. So here, pointed out by the diagram, typical of lymphoma. So normally we would not see those large lymph nodes. All right, so any questions about the lymphatic system? questions, we'll move on to the nervous system. So, we all know we have the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And embryologically, these arise from the neural tube. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which is all of the nerves, obviously, and peripheral ganglia. And these arise from neural crest cells, predominantly, as well as projections from the central nervous system. Okay. So first we'll just do a quick overview of the somatic sensory and somatic motor systems. So together the somatic nervous system. And these are the voluntary, the conscious voluntary system, if you think of it. So you have the input through the conscious input of sensory information, and then you have the control of skeletal muscles and also some of your skin sensory information is coming in through that. But predominantly your voluntary motor neurons are part of this nervous system. And to understand the arrangement of it, we kind of have to go back to embryology a little bit. So here we have an embryo, and it's starting to form segmentation along the spine due to lots of concentration gradients of different growth factors. And part of what's happening during that segmentation, not only is the neural tube and neural crest cells themselves starting to form some segmentation within the cellular organization, we're also getting the development of somites here. And those are tissue blobs, basically, that become the skin and muscle of the body. Some of those migrate posteriorly or dorsally, whatever you like to call it, to become the muscles and get the back. Others migrate anteriorly or ventrally to become the muscles of the front of the trunk and the extremities. And this is important because as the segmentation in the somites is occurring, we're also getting outgrowth of immature neurons into those somites, and they're going to follow those somites out into eventually the muscles and skin that arises from that. So this is an example of motor neurons. They arise here in the anterior edge or margin of the neural tube, which will eventually be the spinal cord. So, and then travel out into the somites that are closest to it. So they're tracking a particular gradient of chemicals that's guiding them to stay right within that somite. And that allows for very tight organization of where each section of the spinal cord actually innervates in the periphery. Same thing happens with the sensory neurons. So here we have them added to the diagram. They are arise from the neural crest cells and send projections in the dorsal part of the neural tube, eventually spinal cord, and then down to a similar location as the motor neurons in the ventral part of the neural tube. And then they also send projections out into the somites and the developing skin and muscles. And again, they're following gradients of growth factors to help keep them in line with all of the tissue arising from this particular somite. And so we get very, very distinct segregation along the body as well as along the spinal cord as far as innervation organization. And so what does that, come on, mean? Well, that means that we've got specific sections here. So this is the C6 segment of the spinal cord, so coming out just underneath the C6 vertebra, we've got the sensory neurons coming out through this dermatome, or you can call it dermomyotome if we're talking about both motor and sensory at the same time, and it's projected projecting to a particular region along the arm of the individual. So this colored in region. And so that area is innervated by the C6 spinal nerve and only the C6 spinal nerve. Okay? And so you've got a continuation of all the different spinal nerves all the way down the body, segmentally innervating different sections of the body. Same thing with the motor neurons. So again, following out those developing muscles and skin to innervate particular muscle within that myotome or dermatomyotome. So very nice segmentation. And what does that mean for a clinician? That means we've got a lovely little map here of the dermatomyotomes of an individual, where we can map out and know exactly where each spinal nerve is innervating. Okay, so, and each cranial nerve too. So we'll just start here with C2. So C2 has this area right here in the neck. The spinal nerve C3 right there, and so on and so forth, down to the thoracic spinal nerves that take care of most of the trunk, and then the lumbar spinal nerves, and then the sacral spinal nerves usually take care of like the perianal area, genitalia, and all of that, as well as some of the lower extremities. So we know if a patient is presenting with abnormalities in a particular region of their body, we can, and it seems to be neurological in origin, we can then map that back to where the potential injury is. What spinal cord segment might be affected, what spinal nerve might be affected. That's really important, especially in cases of like paralysis, so spinal cord lesion. So when you get, say, a lesion here between T4 and T5, you should have normal function above that, but below that lesion, you'll have deficits in both the sensory and information coming in, and also the motor control of any areas controlled by spinal nerves below that lesion site. Now the extent is going to be determined by the extent of that lesion. So if you have a full lesion of the spinal cord in that area, you're going to have no sense of feeling, no movement control below that area. If you have a partial lesion, you'll have partial loss of those functions. Okay, here's how they innervate into the spinal cord, what looks like an adult individual. So we have here the posterior side. That was supposed to be a P. The anterior side. So motor neurons and both the somatic and visceral motor fibers come into the anterior area here, the anterior horn, whereas the sensory fibers come in through the dorsal root ganglion, otherwise known as the spinal ganglion, and into the dorsal horn. And eventually all get mixed up in the processing centers here. So that is in the gray matter of the spinal cord here, and then this area out here, all the lighter areas in the diagram are all white matter. And just as a review, what's the difference between gray matter and white matter?
Myelination?
Yes, so white matter is myelinated axonal tracts. Gray matter is unmyelinated axons and often the dendritic trees and cell bodies of the neurons. No, don't die on me. Shoot. Not good. How much time do we have left for this class? A half hour? I'm gonna have to run grab my charger because apparently something drained my battery like crazy. I'll be right back.
Party, yeah. Ethan. Yeah, I don't know. Why give me a different like menus instead of have a bunch of options?
Okay, we're revived. Thank goodness. Okay. Alright, so I talked about lesions already. We're good to go. Alright, so that's the central nervous system. We'll get to know it better later on. Peripheral nervous system then, or sorry, the somatosensory, or somatic and somatosensory nervous system. So then let's go on to the visceral and autonomic nervous systems. These are the involuntary, so we don't have to think about what's going on with this system. It's all happening automatically. Whew, I need to run more often. So here's some differences between the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. So in the somatic, we have a single neuron between the central nervous system and the effector cell, so the skeletal muscle cell in that case. With the autonomic nervous system, we have a 2-neuron chain. And what would be the reason for having this extra neuron in there? What do you think? Not just to make it more complicated.
Control.
Control. So every time you have a synapse, you have control over that electrical signal. So very important to have that extra control within this autonomic nervous system. And instead of innervating skeletal muscle, we're going to innervate smooth cardiac muscle glands, the enteric nervous system, etc., and is excitatory or inhibitory. Okay, so here's just an example of the diagram of the difference in the neuronal organization. So we've got the single fiber here from CNS to effector organ. And here we have, in the autonomic system, we have a preganglionic fiber that synapses with the ganglion, either the paravertebral ganglion or ganglia embedded within the wall of the effector organ, and then a postganglionic fiber that actually goes to the effector organ itself and synapses with the tissue that has an effect on. So here's the two different branches of the autonomic nervous system. On the left, we have the parasympathetic here, and on the right, we have the sympathetic. And does anybody remember what the whole point of the sympathetic nervous system is? What?
Excitation? Like
Yeah, it's
movement.
basically preparing the body for some sort of stressor, right? And then the parasympathetic nervous system in general is kind of bringing it back to status quo. Now, they're both active all the time. It's just the amount of activity. So they are always in balance. They're always active. It's just when you need a little extra boost, the sympathetic tone, what we call it, goes up, and the parasympathetic tone goes down. When you're kind of going back into a more restful state, that balance tips the other way a little bit. So, some characteristics of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system arises from T1 through L2 predominantly. So those are the spinal nerves that incorporate sympathetic fibers. And those then track to the sympathetic trunk that we learned about yesterday in lab here. And all those paravertebral ganglia all the way along. Then that's where the pre and post ganglionic fiber synapse in those paravertebral ganglia. And then there's a long fiber going from the sympathetic trunk out to the effector organ. Now in the parasympathetic nervous system, we have cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 in the parasympathetic region, and then also the sacral nerves here. Those can come together to create the parasympathetic nervous system. And they have a single fiber running out to, or almost to, the gland with which it's actually going to have its effect, and the ganglion it synapses with before, where it synapses with the postganglionic fiber actually is very often embedded in the wall of the organ it's affecting. So, some differences there. Any questions about this? Okay. All right, so, okay, we can, remember that we have a chain of ganglia all the way along the vertebral column, and input from only those few nerves there. Those two chains come together at the ganglion impar, down at the sacral area of the vertebral column. And this is, I guess, another example of them coming together then to innervate the plexuses, both in the thoracic and abdominal parts of the body. So some of them innervate the esophageal plexus and cardiac plexuses, and then also the prevertebral plexus is the main one in the abdominal cavity. Right, so this is just an example of how those neurons actually are wired. So we have the exit of those neurons from the ventral horn. They come out into the paravertebral ganglion via the white ramus accumbens. And ramus is basically just a name for branch, so it's the white branch. Okay, and it's because those are heavily myelinated axons. And then the postganglionic fibers then leave the paravertebral ganglion and go out to the posterior ramus of the spinal cord, or the spinal nerve, and that's through the gray ramus communicans, and that's just because at that point those axons are unmyelinated. Okay. Now, like I said, we have a limited number of the spinal nerves that are part of the sympathetic ganglia, our sympathetic nervous system, but we have an entire chain of sympathetic ganglia, or the paravertebral ganglia, all the way up the spine. So the T1 to L2 spinal nerves, some of them will actually travel down the sympathetic chain or sympathetic trunk connectives to the ganglia outside of the range of T1 to L2 to make sure that we have innervation of these ganglia up here. So they will travel out through the white ramus communicans and then down to the appropriate ganglia before exiting into the rest of the periphery. All right, and so like I said, some of these in the cervical area and T1 through T4 go all contribute to the cardiac plexuses through the sympathetic cardiac nerves. So again, T1 through T4 and some of the cervical levels. And also to the prevertebral plexus and ganglia. So that would be, these are the splanchnic nerves. So the greater splanchnic nerve is a bundle here from T5 to T9. They bundle together. The lesser splanchnic nerves, T9 and T10, or T10 and 11, depending on the individual. The least splanchnic nerves from T12. Lumbar splanchnic nerves from L1 to L2. And then the sacral splanchnic nerves from the sacral portion of the sympathetic chain, or the sympathetic trunk, all coming together to take part in that whole prevertebral plexus and all the associated ganglia. So big confluence of branches there, and to just allow for a lot of control and crosstalk between all of those. Yes?
So the white ramus communica, they get the information to from the vertebral column into the ganglions. What about the gray ramus communicans?
The gray ramus communicans, that's the output to the rest of the
body.
Yeah,
Okay.
so The white's from the spinal cord to the paravertebral ganglion, gray's from that out to the spinal nerves, and then out to the rest of the body. through the
Okay.
spinal nerve. Yep. Okay, so know the splanchnic nerves, they're important. You often get particular syndromes associated with impingement of those splanchnic nerves. All right, here's the parasympathetic nervous system again. So again, just a reminder, the cranial parasympathetic outflow through the cranial nerves are 3, 5, 9, and 10, and they synapse with 4 particular ganglia in the head: the ciliary ganglion, the pterygopalatine ganglion, I can't say that today, otic ganglion, and submandibular ganglion. Each of those goes to a particular region of the head. So the ciliary ganglions, the lacrimal glands, the pterygopalatine to the eye for pupillary constriction, the otic ganglion to the parotid salivary glands, and the submandibular ganglion to the salivary glands below the jaw. So at least one of them is the submandibular salivary gland. I don't know what the other one's called. Yeah.
You said these are the ones that are, the ganglion are very close to the actual
Yes.
gland or organ?
Yes. So the paravertebral or the parasympathetic, all of the ganglia are very close to the vector organ. Cranial nerve 10 is also known as the vagus nerve. So it's going to send branches down to the cardiac plexus, innervate the heart, as well as continuing onward down to the prevertebral plexus and innervate parts of the bowel. And then we have our sacral parasympathetic nerves, and these are the pelvic splanchnic nerves, and they innervate the pelvic viscera and genitalia. Okay, any questions about that? It's just learning the pathways, where they go to, basically.
Are we supposed to know them, like all these pathways you're going through?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, with the nervous system, it's just lots and lots of pathways, unfortunately. So know the cranial nerve number, or know that, the pelvic splanchnic nerves and what organs they innervate, okay? All right, so then part of the prevertebral plexus is a control input for the enteric nervous system. So this is a diagram of part of the enteric nervous system. And the enteric nervous system is part of the visceral nervous system that really isn't under direct control by the central nervous system. It can function without a lot of input from the higher processing centers in the brain and spinal cord. It is along the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. So here there's the myenteric plexus and the submucous plexus at 2 different layers of the gastrointestinal wall. So between the 2 muscle layers, between the longitudinal and the circular muscle layers for the myenteric plexus, and then below the circular muscle layer, and before you get to the submucosa, is the submucous plexus. I can't see anything today, good grief. And so these two together form the enteric nervous system. And they control peristalsis, they control some of these sensory feedback from the gastrointestinal tract, of reabsorption of molecules from the digestive tract. So they control a lot of that kind of stuff with very little input from the central nervous system. Now the central nervous system can provide more input and modify it, but it operates fairly independently in general. Okay, so just basically know that the enteric nervous system is kind of its own thing that only just gets modified by the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, but really it's acting fairly independently. Okay? All right, so then this is just an overview to kind of give a broad overview of all of the plexuses. So here on this side are the somatic plexuses. We have cervical plexus here from C4 to C1 to C4 all come together to form that. The brachial plexus is C5 to T1. Then we have the lumbar plexus here, L1 to L4, and the sacral plexus, L4 to S4.
And so would it be a good idea to know that the sacral plexus is L4 to S4, knowing that kind of variation as well?
Yes, so you need to know each of these plexuses and what spinal nerves are a part of them. You need to know each of the splenic nerves, the greater, lesser, least, lumbar here, and sacral and pelvic nerves. You need to know whether it is a somatic plexus or a visceral plexus. I won't make you try to figure out parasympathetic versus sympathetic other than the actual spinal nerves that go give rise to those fibers. But yeah, know the cardiac plexus, esophageal plexus, know that the vagus nerve innervates most of the plexuses in the body. And then the prevertebral plexus, know what those basically innervate. So the prevertebral is going to be abdominal. And some pelvic. And then the esophageal and cardiac are a little more self-explanatory in their names. So this is the part where anatomy just becomes memorizing a lot, unfortunately. So you need to know where they are, but also just keep in mind what the whole point of having these broad networks of interconnected ganglia are. You know, we want input from several different areas because these are complex organs, and we need a high degree of control and the ability to have intercommunication between several different processes happening all at the same time. So that's why we have these plexuses that seem so crazy complex. It gives a lot of control, a lot of communication between different aspects of the nervous system. Yeah.
The visceral is the same as autonomic.
The visceral includes kind of autonomic plus enteric,
Okay.
technically, but since enteric's kind of controlled by the autonomic, it is kind of just all this one thing. Just when we start dividing things out like that, it gets very artificial in the nervous system. Yeah. Okay, so then just a quick clinical application, going back to this segmentation of the nervous system. So we've got segmentation both of the somatic nervous system and the visceral nervous system. And what's interesting is the somatic sensory nerves and the visceral sensory nerves come into the same area of the spinal cord and often synapse on the same interneurons. So that means you can't differentiate between surface pain and visceral pain. So, like for the example they have here, appendicitis, you can't say, oh, my appendix hurts. You don't do that. When somebody presents with appendicitis, they present with pain in this quadrant of the abdomen. And this is the T10 dermatome. And by knowing the location of that dermatome and the source of the innervation of that dermatome, a clinician can then work backwards and say, okay, severe pain in that area, it's most likely a problem in the viscera. And in that area, that's the most likely culprit is the appendicitis because they know that that visceral nerve connects with the T10 level of the spinal cord. So also with heart attack, what are the physical symptoms of a heart attack typically? What are people complaining of? Chest pain, left arm.
Well, depends if you're a girl, you complain of everything, or nothing. No,
Yeah, no, there's a lot of variation, but some of the most common complaints of somebody who's having a heart
Not
attack
bashing
is
on girls.
chest heaviness and pain and pain down the left arm. That is because those visceral nerves are coming into the same spinal cord level and synapsing with the same spinal cord interneurons as the sensory nerves from the left arm and areas of the chest. So very important to understand all these dermomyotones and where all these spinal nerves are coming from and going to, because that's going to help with these types of diagnoses.